Welcome to Seed to Success, the podcast where we deep dive into the strategies, stories, and smart decisions that help VAs and OBMs grow and thrive. I'm your host, Adrienne Donnelly, and whether you're just starting out or looking for ways to take your business to the next level, you are in the right place. Thanks for tuning in. Now let's get into today's conversation. A very warm welcome to Dr. Shauna Watts. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
I am excited about this conversation. I feel like it will be one of those episodes that people can refer back to whenever they need some reminders, because today we're going to be talking sleep, energy, and burnout. And I have a feeling that they're all somehow connected. Now, I have heard your name many times. We both work across Newcastle and the Central Coast of New South Wales and share a beautiful mutual friend, Laura. But this is our first time actually getting to virtually meet. So I know a bit about you and your work, but for anyone listening or watching, it'd be great to hear from you a bit about your background and the work that you do.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here. So, my background, just I suppose I should say straight away, you're probably thinking, what is that accent? So, I am originally born and bred in Northern Ireland, just outside Belfast. And I moved to Australia 13 years ago with my husband and 4 children. And I do look back and think that I was probably slightly insane at that point because I think, how did I do that? But anyway, I did and we did. So, my background is that I have been a doctor for 27 years and my interests have evolved over time. But my main special interest and focus is on midlife women, to be honest. And that encompasses everything from hormones to weight to skin. But I tend to wrap them all up in confidence because I think in midlife, women tend to lose confidence, not only in maybe obvious things like their bodies, but maybe also things like their brain or their ability to do their job or their ability to connect with people or the ability to present like they used to. So I think that that's where I feel like my niche is. And I have 2 clinics, one in Newcastle at the junction and one on the Central Coast. And I also reach out to women through my podcast as well. And look, the reason I do what I do is because of the women that I see every day. And I just hear regular stories where people are telling me, of one very common line is, I just don't feel like myself anymore. And whenever we deep dive into that, of course, everyone is very individual, but there are just common themes that repeatedly come out, and almost everyone will have some symptoms of perimenopause and menopause. I don't think there's really anyone who manages to get through it with nothing. Usually, if you just dig a little beneath the surface, you find that people are putting up with things that they probably don't need to. And my background as a GP, which I've loved my career and I love in general practice that you never know what's going to come in through the door. You could have someone with diabetes and then somebody's flipped with their husband, and then you could have a teenager who's got acne, and it's a wonderful variety and such a great learning environment. But the downside of general practice as it stands is the appointment times are very short and we need to move through people very, very quickly. And I realized that what people like me needed, because of course I'm going to be 50 soon, is that we needed time. We needed someone to take their time with us and actually not just deal with that our hair was falling out or that our eyes were dry or that, sex was painful or whatever. We need someone who's going to go from the top of her head to the tips of her toes and try and talk about all of it. So that's kind of really how my clinics, which are called You by Dr. Shauna Watts, and I want my patients to walk in as themselves and walk out as a better, more confident version of themselves. But that's what we're about.
That's really important. I love that top of your head to the tip of your toes. We recently had one of our members on the podcast who has, and I won't try to pronounce it, but a chronic illness. And one of the things she talked about was that appointment times with doctors, getting in, trying to give them this huge whole picture of yourself, which for her is quite complicated because of this condition that she has. So it's quite refreshing actually to hear someone from within the industry acknowledge that that system doesn't really work. So
It's
Yeah.
definitely not a system that really serves women very well, I don't think. And I think that it's, in defense of my GP colleagues, it's also not their fault. They're overworked. They see
Mm.
so many people. You've got to get notes written, prescriptions written, referral letters written. You've got so little time. But we have given ourselves, I suppose, the comfort in our clinic is that we spend 60 minutes in that first appointment, and it just lets us really take our time. And to be honest, sometimes we could go on for another 30 minutes because there's always so much more to talk about. But anyway, that's
Mm.
just a little bit about me.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. So, as I mentioned, we're going to talk on three separate topics today: sleep, energy, and burnout. And we're obviously talking in the context of our viewers, which are primarily women in Australia running a virtual business. A lot of the time, that's from home. We're client facing, we're delivering a service to our clients that are all around the country and perhaps abroad. So let's start with sleep. One of the really common things I hear a lot of women experience, and I am also starting to experience it. I turned 40 in the middle of 2025, is that 3 a.m. wake up, whether that's hot sweats, whether it's racing mind, whether it's restless legs, whether it's any of those sorts of things. Is there a scientific reason why that is happening?
There absolutely is. We call it in our clinic the 3:18 a.m. wake up club. We
Okay.
reckon that we could all be like having fun and texting and talking to each other. And it's very, very common. And I think what I find is that women will tell you that they are exhausted and they go to bed exhausted and they often fall asleep okay. And they think, oh, good, I've got, I'm asleep. And then boom, somewhere between 2 and 4 a.m., it's like ka-ching, brain wide awake, thoughts often racing. For some women, it can be even steps further. It can be feeling anxious. Some women will wake feeling palpitations, their heart's racing, and then the whole thing will spiral. For some women, it's also hot flashes or a night sweat. So people can wake up absolutely drenched in sweat. And it is two hormones that get mentioned a lot, which is estrogen and progesterone. And so think of estrogen and progesterone as they're two very important sleep support structures, basically. And they naturally scaffold your sleep. And it's only when they start to disappear and go rogue a little bit that you begin to go, okay, wow, now I understand that really these hormones do so much more than we've been taught. So we always are. As a girl, if you do biology in school, you're taught about periods and breast development and ovulation and a little bit, and hear a little bit about our hormones. But what we're now beginning to really understand and trying to educate people is that these hormones are whole body hormones and they're actually really have a massive impact on your brain. And so, unfortunately, you are getting that estrogen in perimenopause. So, it would be lovely if estrogen in perimenopause just did this like little gradual down nice and slowly. But unfortunately, it doesn't. It's the zone of chaos up, down, up, down, up, down. So it's very high, very low, very high, very low. And then, of course, it also can confuse you and go back into a really normal cycle again. Just when you think you're going crazy, then you think you're even going crazier because you're like, oh, I seem to be fine again. And so perimenopause is the zone of chaos, but it's that loss of estrogen that's really changing the architecture of the sleep, changing that what's called REM sleep that's very important.
Mm-hmm.
And some people probably have heard of that. And so estrogen
Mm-hmm.
is very fundamental in that. Now, of course, this is also very complicated because progesterone is also dropping off. And it's actually a hormone that acts nearly like a natural sort of anti-anxiety medication. It acts around the GABA and receptors in the brain, and it often makes people feel quite chill. And whenever you have less progesterone, that also impacts your sleep. And it's sometimes why whenever women take progesterone in their HRT, they're like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. I'm sleeping again. But it is a combination of both. And of course, tangled in amongst all of that is cortisol levels, which are definitely not behaving themselves the way they used to. And sometimes people are getting blood glucose drops during the night, which is also your body then goes, ah, my goodness, we're starving. We're going to drop our blood sugar, and that can wake you up. So there's definitely a lot of interplay between a lot of these hormones, and ultimately it's recurrent issue. And, I made a video recently, and I said about the 3:18 a.m. club, and I think it was one of my most commented on videos. And everybody seems to have that one time that they wake up. So it's very, very difficult and it's very frustrating. And I think for your listeners, I think, it's really hard to be a mom and work and run a virtual business if you've woken up multiple times during the night, because the other pain is that often you don't just wake up and then roll over and go back to sleep again, because you are heightened, you're anxious, you're hot, you're sweaty, all the things. And so it's really difficult. And probably your partner snoring also is now really, really annoying you. And because before you would slept through it, but now that's now grating your gears as well. And of course, whenever you're completely head up. And then what lots of people do is they make the mistake. They reach over, have a look at their phone to see what time it is. Oh, and they notice, oh, look, actually, there's a little message. Oh, I'll just look at that message. And then the next thing they know, they're just not completely wide awake. So I think it is definitely very hormonally driven, but also, of course, the situation that we find ourselves in with foes and things just makes the whole thing, self-perpetuate.
I think it's quite validating what you're saying because it's normalizing that experience. And obviously, as a general practitioner, all the advice or guidance you're giving today is general in nature. But in terms of some tips, is there anything that we can be doing on a day-to-day basis in terms of like habits, lifestyle, diet, anything like that that may reduce the severity of that chaotic zone that you spoke about? Now, obviously, there could be other factors around other conditions anyone may have, other environmental factors, but as a general rule, is there anything that you would recommend people could try to see if they could just minimize the severity of the 318 club, the club that no one wants to be a part of?
And so absolutely. And I think obviously first and foremost, if it's relevant to you, then it is potentially about having a conversation with your doctor about hormones. And I think they can be an absolute game changer. But if we were to step back from that and say, well, what can we do? Obviously your listeners, lots of them work from home. And I think that can be challenging for so many aspects. I mean, lots of people are very jealous of people who work from home, but the reality is they don't actually ever get to get away from their workplace. And sometimes that lack of separation or getting to a natural end of day, getting in your car and decompressing on the way home, most of your listeners probably don't get to do that. I don't know, but like when I drive home from Newcastle, for example, it's a 90-minute drive. I get to listen to the radio. I'm listening to a podcast and I'm separating myself from my day at work. And I think it's going to
Yes.
be really important that your listeners think about how are they going to separate and that their brain knows that the day has ended. And I think one of the things, is having a little routine. Like, is it that they go outside and walk up and down the street, or is it they go and change into some different clothing? Or is it that they have a playlist of 2 or 3 songs that they play at the end of their day? Do you know, like you're trying to get a baby into a routine of going to bed? Well, just like you're trying to set yourself up with a new routine and a new trigger. And I think it is also, we're in this era, and I am very guilty of this myself, of constantly checking emails, just one last check, just in case such and such has replied, or just in case there's a problem. But what are we doing whenever we're doing that? We're getting our brain set up and ready for a disaster, and that's, of course, releasing lots of neurotransmitters and messengers in our brain. It's certainly not telling our brain, actually, it's now time to de-escalate. So I think trying to have a little bit of a routine where your brain knows where the day ends. And I know, again, for people who work from home, I've got lots of friends who do this. They tend to work, then they do kid stuff at bedtime, and then they'll often do more work again before bed. And that's probably just not ideal or not how we're programmed, especially if you have a stressful job, which, let's face it, most people tend to have some kind of stress with their job. So that'd be one of the things, is like creating some kind of a boundary and separation so that your brain can understand, okay, now work is done, the stress bit done, and now this is about relaxation. I think the other thing that people do is they tend to think about sleep and they think about it at night time, but actually you set yourself up for success for your that night's sleep that morning. And I can't stress enough the amount of research that is really coming out and telling us stuff that we probably knew millennia ago, but we've forgotten. Our ancestors probably knew this, but we need to, within 1 hour of waking up, you need to go outside and let your eyes and your body see and feel the daylight and the sunshine, because that is how you're going to regulate your circadian rhythm. And that's what tells your body when nighttime is. So, for example, when you go in a plane and you go to the US or Europe and you get jet lagged, you try and stay up and stay with the actual day that you're in. You want
Yeah.
to do that every morning, even if you can just step outside onto your front porch or your back garden where there's a bit of sun and drink your coffee or whatever it is that you have in the morning, and just let your brain see that, okay, the sun has come up, it's morning time. So it's thinking about that nighttime routine. We're over people telling us to have a bath and take some deep breaths. And while I love
Mm.
bath, and I think the deep breathing and breathing exercises are, of course, really important. I think whenever you're a woman who has a million things in her mind, it's about how can we set ourselves up for success. I had a patient who came in recently and she was not sleeping at all. And she was completely stressed. She was actually just sat and cried in my room. She was so exhausted, feeling
Oh
snappy
gosh.
and irritable with everybody, feeling like she was making mistakes at work. But whenever we looked at her routine, she was getting up. She wasn't having anything to eat until lunchtime. She was having multiple coffees throughout the afternoon. And caffeine is such a stimulant, and people don't realize that if you have a coffee at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, that coffee's still going to be in your system at 8 or 9 o'clock at night, which means that you're kind of still buzzing. So caffeine does have quite a
Yeah.
long half-life. So I think it's about making good decisions about what you're putting in your body as well. Again, I had another patient and she was a bit of a Pepsi Max addict. And she was saying to me that she always has a Pepsi Max at night whenever she was watching her favorite shows, but then she couldn't obviously go to sleep. So I think it's making good choices with what you're eating, what you're drinking, making sure for your dinner that you have a decent amount of protein in your dinner and a decent amount of fiber in your dinner, because that is going to keep you fuller for longer, and that you're trying not to have a big bag of salty potato chips. It's going to make you really thirsty and wake you up because you want to have a drink. Or, it's just about making the choices that we all know in our hearts. We
Hmm.
probably all know them, but it's just trying to go back to those basics and saying, how can I set myself up for success? The other one I say to women a lot is, and try not to have very stressful nighttime phone calls, because if you have a sister or a good friend or someone who who phones and downloads their very difficult relationship problems or their work problems, and you come off the phone and you know that by the time you come off, you're feeling so on edge and so anxious, well, that's certainly not go to
Mm.
sleep either.
This is perfectly segued into one of the questions we had from the community around sleep and those tips for really being able to quiet your mind. So I guess that question is in relation to getting to bed, switching off at the end of the day, or even any, I guess, small things that we could try at that sort of 3 o'clock or that 2 to 4 a.m. window when you wake up and your brain starts going, what happened yesterday? What's coming up today? And it's just, I always refer to it as, for those of us that are old enough to remember Wheel of Fortune, like the wheel's spinning around and it eventually is meant to slow down and land on a triangle or a slice of the wheel, but it just gets there and then it picks something else up and it sort of goes again. So any of those tips for quietening our minds during those times.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, I'm just as guilty of this as anyone. It is obviously just the moment that, a thought comes into your head. It is about just trying to tell yourself, this is relaxing time. I can't do anything about Claire's bad marriage or my boss's problems or whatever. And I'm just going to have to try and tell myself. And look, for a lot of people, it's using maybe like one of the apps that help people feel calm,
Mm-hmm.
or for some people, it is using white noise. I have to say, I do have my phone. I do listen to podcasts and things to fall asleep. Different people use different techniques, but there's definitely lots of apps and things that you can use. There's gray noise and brown noise and all sorts of things. There's various breathing techniques that you can do. But I think the first and foremost thing is also not to get yourself really anxious about, oh my God,
Mm,
I need to get back to sleep. I'm going to be so tired tomorrow. I mean, in all joking aside, but you're
that's
not
so
going to
true.
die from not having sleep. Like, you might feel lousy, but getting yourself into an absolute tiz about it is definitely not going to help. I think getting up, and if you're lying there for a long time, that is not a good thing. I usually do recommend that people will get up at that point and maybe just go downstairs, put on a low light, maybe read a book for a chapter or a few pages until they've calmed themselves back down again, maybe have a glass of water, and then go back and try to go to bed again. But I don't think there's a great benefit of lying there for 2 to 3 hours, getting yourself more and more worked up. The other thing that I do like, and
Mm,
obviously this is something that people do need to discuss with their own GP, but a lot of women do also get a benefit from using something like magnesium glycinate. That can be very helpful for most women. And so I think there are things that you can take that can help the situation. The other one is making sure, and I think here in Australia it is very important, that your bedroom is not too hot. So again, what we know is to fall asleep successfully, our body temperature actually has to drop. That is a prerequisite to falling asleep. And some people's bodies are better at it than others, but you nearly want to have your bedroom colder than you would think. I kind of like the fan going all the time. I quite like that noise of the fan. It's just that sort of
yes.
and that air slightly moving over my face just keeps me cool. So it's that kind of things. And also make sure that your bed's comfortable. You spend so much time in it. Make sure you've got comfortable sheets and that you have a cover that you can flip on and off if you need to. If you get a bit cold, that there's a blanket nearby that you can pull on and one that you can push off. I think getting too hot is going to make that situation worse as well.
Amazing. Let's move on to energy. So it's almost the opposite. It's the 3 p.m. I don't know about anyone else listening, but 3 p.m. tends to be the time that I start looking for something. I'm naturally a very early riser and I'm quite productive early in the morning. So that real slump that comes in the afternoon, I think, and we've probably had marketing show us this. It's like that, have a break, have a Kit Kat, those sorts of things are like the 3 o'clock. That's how we're marketed to. But I think we do actually naturally have a bit of a slump at those times. Are you able to talk a little bit about, I guess, what's causing those and maybe some suggestions of what we could do instead of reaching for a quick sugar chocolate, a Kit Kat? Yeah, no offense to the Kit Kat team, sorry.
And I mean, this is so real, I want to normalize it first of all. So it actually is normal in all humans of all ages that our cortisol is peaks in the morning, and that's what kind of hopefully gets us up out of bed in the morning and helps us have energy for the day and drive that it's going to be a good day. But
Mm,
I think quite specifically in perimenopause and menopausal women, the reality is that we're also navigating what we've just talked about, which is all those hormonal fluctuations and probably much poorer sleep. And so we're already feeling exhausted. And then, of course, add into that many women in this age are also getting upset because their weight is also increasing. So they're not
yeah.
eating properly because they're seeing weight piling on and they're thinking, well, I'm just going to have to stop eating because I'm just getting heavier and heavier and I'm getting this belly fat. So we end up in this vicious cycle. And what starts off with being biology and physiology, and then it's added to by this sort of perimenopause thing. So there is a real reason why we do feel like this in the afternoon. And I think, as you said, this is where people then start to reach for the Diet Cokes and oh, I'm going to just have a couple of coffees to get me through. I'm going to have
Yeah.
some chocolate. But then all you're doing is giving yourself a big spike of sugar and blood glucose, which very quickly drops again. So I think it's then trying to think about, well, what could you have that we have to acknowledge that this is normal and will happen in the day. So what are you going to do about it? I mean, so we make sure
Yes.
that you have a better lunch. A very protein rich lunch is often very helpful.
Hmm.
I do find a lot of women tend to skip lunch or they grab something and nibble a sandwich or some cracker bread at their desk. But again, what kind of protein are they getting? So I think we need to have protein at lunch, but then also thinking about, well, look, if we know this happens at 3 o'clock every day, what are we going to have on hand? Like, could we have some hard-boiled eggs that we keep in the fridge, or could we have a handful of almonds or some pistachios or something like that that we know is going to give us some energy, but it's also going to give us energy that kind of lasts until we get home and hopefully have some dinner. So I think for me, it would be about acknowledging that this is a real thing, and rather than feeling guilty about it or feeling like you've got a personality flaw and thinking, well, everyone else seems to be pushing through. Believe me, everyone is feeling the same way. And there's been lots of research on the quality of work. And even if people do exams at this time of the day, how they perform, and it's definitely not as good. So it's not, you don't have a personality problem. You're not lazy. It's not that you're not working hard enough, but we have to accept that the physiology is what it is, and it's now trickier if you're a midlife woman, and we have to try and work with it. So I would say a protein-rich snack is probably what I would suggest. I also think it's, if you start to feel like that, if you can, step outside, walk around your back garden, go for a walk around the block, again, telling your brain it's still daytime, the sun is still high in the sky usually, and that is also going to help. Again, you're telling your brain a message, this is daytime, we need to stay awake.
It's a good point, because one of the other questions we had from the community was around navigating different time zones. Because all of us work remotely and virtually, we have that opportunity to work with clients primarily all around Australia, but also sometimes overseas. So if we take that example of us here on the East Coast, then working with someone in the West Coast who can fluctuate between 2 to 3 hours, is like that time that your clients may be hitting their strides if they're over in WA, or vice versa. If you're in WA supporting people on the other side, navigating those time zones, that 3 p.m. slump could even be more significant, because you're trying to wrap up the day. You might be looking to hit a Pilates class. If you've got children, they're getting off the bus and making their way home, is that slump. And I think you gave some great tips around things that we could either do in terms of movement or to be eating that would give us just a little natural push to get us through those last few hours of the day.
Yeah, 100%. And look, I do understand that time zone thing can be challenging. One of my children actually lives in Amsterdam. She's only 16, and she's training to be a ballerina. And I even know that at times whenever she will phone in the
Wow.
afternoon, and sometimes I'm definitely a bit buried in work, and she's all up for a chat because it's first thing in the morning for her. She's all buzzing, and I'm like, oh. And she sometimes will tell me off and she'll say, Mom, you don't even sound excited to talk to me. And I miss her so much, but I'm just fighting. I'm fighting the physiology of the moment. But yeah, I think those protein rich snacks, and also one other thing I just want to mention is that sometimes people feel like with exercise, and I can be guilty of this. Lots of people are very all or nothing. If they can't go on a 5K hike, or they can't go to the gym for an hour, and then it's kind of, they, in their mind, they think it's not worth it. And I like to call them exercise snacks. What I mean by that is, it is worth it to go out and walk 100 meters up and down the road and come back into your house, or it is worth it to get up from your desk and go and walk up and down the stairs 2 times. It doesn't have to be a huge amount of things. It's just getting yourself moving. And we've got really, really good evidence to say that when you do tiny little bits of exercise and movement, it actually encourages your body to want to do more. And so I usually will say to my patients, let's not think about 10,000 steps or 15,000 steps or 3 gym classes a week, especially if people haven't been doing a lot of moving and they've got a very sedentary job. Let's think about how we could put some little snacks of exercise into your day. And as I said, it's, even if it's walking around your garden or walking up and down your street, I'm happy with that because it's still movement.
Yeah, you've absolutely nailed it, what I'm like, because I'm a little bit all or nothing. Like if I can't get to the gym or meet a friend for a walk around the area, I'm a little bit like, well, what's the point of just walking to Woolworths instead of driving? I just won't bother. So I think that's a really great takeaway for that. I love that term, that exercise snacks. You talked a little bit there about the personal impact of energy, and I want to just chat a little bit more about that. We mentioned a lot of our viewers and listeners have young families, a lot of us have partners. So how do you see in your work in the clinic how those energy levels then play out into like showing up for your kids when they come running through the door, or it gets to the end of the day and you're getting that sense from your partner that they'd be interested in a bit of intimacy, and you're just sitting there going like, I've got nothing left in the tank. Or even if it's you're just out walking your dog, or you always call your mum on this night, how does that energy play out, and how do we communicate that with people, especially if we're navigating peri or menopause?
Yeah, look, I think you've absolutely nailed it. And I think this is one of the things that really does begin to, one, make women feel very, very guilty, and begin to also cause some distance within relationships because,
Yeah.
honestly, there's not a day that goes past that I don't have women crying in my room because they don't like who they've perhaps become. They hear themselves snapping at their children in the car, or going off about something that would actually, that might have been annoying. Someone didn't unload the dishwasher, or someone, didn't change the toilet roll or whatever, but they find themselves just absolutely losing the plot over it. And they also, women will often tell me that they often try and sneak off to bed early to get away from their partner and to try and get to go to sleep. And I'm just being honest with you, it's so common because I think the reality is where we find ourselves in this time in history, but women are exhausted. We describe our generation at the minute as this sort of sandwich generation who are often looking after young children or teenagers, or even, I've
Yes.
got poor children. Some of them are young adults. Believe you me, they still require quite a lot of input and support and help and chat and all the things. It's not like see you when they're 18 and that's it. So I think, and then we're also the same generation who are often looking after parents and supporting parents and
Yes.
taking them to doctor's appointments, or supporting them through illnesses or cancer treatments, or even parents with mental health problems. And even some people have their own grandparents that they're also still alive. They're trying to help grandparents as well. And so, and then they're having, most of us are at an age where we've probably done reasonably well in our careers. So we're in a reasonably senior positions, or we've got our own businesses. So there's all the pressure of that, and we maybe employ other people. So we've got all the responsibility of that on our shoulders. And then we're not sleeping, and we're exhausted, and we're gaining weight, and we feel like we've got no energy, and we look in the mirror and our hair's falling out, and we're just like, what is this? And the last thing
Yeah.
that you kind of want is then for someone, to give you that tap on the shoulder in bed, and you're like,
How about it?
like, no way, I am so tired.
Unsubscribe.
Unsubscribe. Just leave me alone. And I find that lots of women at that phase are also then beginning to question everything. Like, do they like their partner? But is the
Yeah.
snoring's really annoying and he's really irritating right now? Or they feel really guilty. And while we would like to believe that lots of partners are really supportive, the reality is that some aren't. Some are very demanding. And for some women, for example, sex can become really uncomfortable and painful,
Yes.
but they've got a partner who is like basically considered it his right. And so there's all this stuff to navigate. And I think that what has really been a game changer for a lot of the women who see me is that I encourage people to bring their partner to an appointment. And it's not that I think that the partner shouldn't believe his own partner, but sometimes hearing this information from a professional, it just maybe rings that has a bit more significance, or, it maybe makes that person step back and go, oh, actually, this is a real thing. And gosh, there's a whole clinic dedicated to this stuff. So this must
And
re-
research
yeah,
and
this is not
yeah.
just my partner. And I think that it can be really helpful. And that's not to say there's lots of women who don't want their partner to come to that appointment, and that is absolutely fine. And but I think it can be really beneficial. Or a lot of my patients will tell me that they get their partner to listen to my podcast, and I've even made a couple
Yep.
of episodes that are just for men. So I think that it's trying to explain to your partner and also your family, even your mom. You might be able to say, look, mom, I'm struggling a bit, and I know that I normally phone you every evening, but for a little while I'm actually not going to do that. I'm just need to go and have a little walk by myself and listen to some music, or listen to the waves if I'm at the beach or whatever. And I think just being trying to dig deep, but being really honest with other people and tell them what you need. Because I think for most women, we're very much the heartbeat of our families. And if we're not
Yes.
well and we're not coping well, actually the whole thing can often fall apart. So I think it's, they talk about on an airplane, put your own oxygen mask on first. I
Mm-hmm.
think we have got a generation of women who also have not been taught really how to be selfish in any way. We were told that we could have it all, but the bottom line is for most of us, it also means that we get to do it all as well. We're expected to have a really good job and a good group of friends, and we're meant to be great to our family, and we're meant to have beautiful kids who are intelligent and talented and well-rounded and do all the activities, but we're also meant to have an amazing house and be well presented and beautifully decorated, and like the pressure is immense. So I think it is okay to just
Mm.
say, hopefully we're all at the age where we can say, you know what, actually I can't be all things to all people, and for the next little while I am going to put my own oxygen mask on. And I think I think it is okay to say to kids, look, actually mom is going through some health issues at the minute, it's nothing for you to worry about, but I am feeling really tired, and I am aware that I do get a bit more grumpy and worked up about things, and I'm sorry about that, but I would love it if you could help me. So if you could, maybe when it's your turn to do the dishwasher, that you could do it, or you could put your stuff into the laundry hamper for me, because I'm really tired and I'm trying to do a lot of things. So I think in an age appropriate way, I think you can definitely let your family in on what you need. And again, I think it's not the time to have the conversation probably if you're in the middle of an argument, or you're in the
Yes.
middle of your partner having a stroke because you've refused sex. I think the time to do it is to actually say, listen, on Saturday morning, could we go for a coffee or a walk? And I need to talk to you about what's going on for me. And I know that not everyone feels they've got that communication. For some people, it might be writing your partner a letter or a note or an
Mm-hmm.
email, but just or saying, look, I'd love if you would have a look at this book because I think it might be really helpful. I think the vast majority of times whenever we do have partners come into the clinic, once they understand a little bit more that's what's going on, they do seem to really get a lot more on board. So I would, I suppose I would challenge anyone listening to step out of their comfort zone and share what's going on for them.
That's some really amazing resources. And I already, that what you just said then, the heartbeat of the family, I'm already thinking about some of our members thinking they're going to be nodding their head listening to that, but also putting some language around what we're experiencing, like we would if we were really snappy because we were getting our period, or if someone's navigating anything within the fertility space and all of those changes. A similar thing, it's not something that if we're in a heterosexual relationship that men will experience, so it's obviously hard for them to understand, but trying to educate them and giving them that opportunity to understand. I think it takes a bit of courage and a bit of vulnerability, and hoping that that conversation lands safely. But I think, yeah, those resources, the podcast you talked about, and just having those conversations is very powerful. The last topic we're going to spend some time on is burnout. So with the women that you primarily work with in your clinic, are there some common, I guess, signs or symptoms, I'm not sure if that's the right word, that you see when women are presenting in that unfortunate phase of or season of burnout?
Yeah, I think, if we think about burnout and if you look at like what the WHO categorized
Mm.
burnout as meaning, is they're looking for three things, which are exhaustion, cynicism or detachment, and reduced efficacy at work. But that's very much a workplace definition of the word burnout. And I think people can be burnt out not only by work, but in fact by their entire lives. And what we were previously discussing, like what have
Mm.
to do. The things that I notice in women with burnout, and I have to say there is a very strong overlap between burnout and perimenopause symptoms in people who are having bad perimenopause, is that what I call the narrowing signs. And what I mean by that is everything is getting narrower. So they're dropping the activities that sort of was their thing, or they're dropping
Uh,
the friendship and outing. So they might have been the person who always organized the girls' night out. And suddenly, not only do they not organize it, but they don't want to go. And they often don't go, or they're making excuses to not go. They were
Hmm.
someone who loved exercising. I had a lady recently and she was obsessed with running, like obsessed to the point it was probably verging on unhealthy. And she actually, her husband brought her in and she was not in a great way. And he said, I know whenever she has stopped running that there is something really wrong. He said, even when she had postnatal depression, she still ran. And he said, but she's not running at all.
That's the white
Yeah,
flag.
and it was like, there is something really wrong here. So I think people suddenly stopping exercising, kind of stopping doing the things that were then. And I think, if we
Hmm.
go back to that original definition, people just kind of getting to the point where they're a bit detached from everybody and everything, like someone who probably has always really cared and they still care, but they actually feel quite numb. They're just like,
Hmm.
everything feels really difficult. And they might be still trying to go through the motions, but actually, if you talk to them, they'll tell you that they nearly feel kind of slightly dead or numb inside. They just don't really care. Sometimes they just feel meh, just there's just nothing excites them. Nothing maybe makes them really sad either. They just feel a bit of nothing. And I think the
Mm.
signs that I would be thinking, okay, there is really something not right here. And I think, as I say, it's often in midlife women becomes a little bit more complicated because, of course, you then also have women who maybe have done very well in their career, who maybe have been on a bit of a trajectory of where they want to get to with their business, and all of a sudden their brain's foggy. They feel absolutely exhausted. They're maybe in a presentation that they could have said upside down, standing on their head, and suddenly they're losing words. They can't remember what they're about to say, and confidence is absolutely tanking as well. And so it's
Yes.
stuck in this kind of vicious cycle of, and then the problem as being the heart of it is sometimes I used to say in my house, I'm going to change my name because it was just like, mom, 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 do you know what this is? Do you know it? Like, no one looks for anything. Like, I spent half
Yeah.
of last night looking for my son's McDonald's apron because couldn't remember where he'd put it. And it suddenly became my problem at 10 o'clock last night. But that's what life isn't it like? But I kind of sometimes I think, why don't you just go and ask your dad? But they
Yeah.
never do because they'll say, oh, he wouldn't know where it is. But I'm supposed to magically know all this stuff. So I think it is very easy for women to feel burnt out in their life. And sometimes we are also our own worst enemies because I know whenever I'm feeling like, oh my gosh, I can't do one more thing. And then someone will ask me some ridiculous question like, do you think we should have an event for work? I go, great idea, let's do it.
I'll get the
And I'm
cupcakes.
like, why did I say I would do this? So I think it is just if you can notice in yourself or maybe even in your good friend, seeing this
Mm.
person become quieter, this person who used to love going out, constantly making excuses or just not showing up or showing up and leaving early. I think it as a friend, it is also important to notice that there might be something more going on for this person.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point because often it's a topic that we hear a lot of very successful women talk about. There's many a podcast episode of women sharing their story about burnout, but often the point of view of those stories or those sharings is on the other side after they've come out the other side of it. So I guess this is great for you to share what are some of those signs that we can start to see. And it's a really beautiful point that you made around not just in ourselves, but in other people that we care about, whether it be we've got a lot of virtual friends in our space that are other business owners that we have really beautiful relationships with, but you can even just sense sometime, oh, they haven't been in our group chat as much, or they haven't showed up for any of our sessions recently, and that's not like them, or even I haven't seen them sharing on their social media, and just being able to see those signs in other people. I think that's so important because it may prevent that period. And I guess it's not something you can test, right? It's not a blood test, it's not a scan,
No, it's not. And I
that
think
space of burnout.
the term burnout, it's so intertwined. And as you say, those are such good examples of modern day ways to notice, that person who always
Yeah.
share photos or who always seem to be active and commenting suddenly isn't anymore. And I think one of the things I will say, it is often the most confident and stoic women who do end up burnt out because they won't stop. They just keep going and going and going. And eventually, I suppose, in really non-medical terms, your body just goes, you know what? Sorry, actually. And
Yeah. Tried to tell
yeah,
you.
gave you a couple of warning signs and you just weren't listening. So I'm going to now make you. And for some women, it does present, they get lots of episodes of tonsillitis or they keep getting colds and flus all the time. So sometimes your body will go, okay, well, you're not listening to me telling you that you're mentally exhausted. So I'm now going to give you a little physical warning, or they'll get like wake up with a rash all over their body, or they'll end up with really sore joints that we can't find a specific reason for. So I do think our body has a way of telling us what it wants to tell us.
I remember a lady, and I wish I could remember who it was. She said, the universe will give you a little, like a little feather sort of brush to be like, hey, just letting you know. Then it'll upgrade to a bit of a tap on the shoulder, and then basically the universe will just come running and shove you in the back and trip you over to be like, I tried to tell you. So that's, I guess, yeah. And it complicates it then too when so many of the symptoms or the signs of burnout cross over with what we've talked about with perimenopause. And I guess that's where your GP comes in to look at some more of those physical body testing to see what's actually going on in the body with hormone levels and those sorts of things.
Absolutely. And I think I want to just clarify there that can also be frustrating because, of course, if you're in perimenopause, and many of your listeners will probably know this already, but in perimenopause, really annoyingly, when you do a blood test, the blood test looks normal. And that's really annoying. And so, what I would stress is that a hormone test doesn't help tell me whether you're in perimenopause or not. Perimenopause is a diagnosis that I make based on your history and the symptoms that you're telling me. And of course, there is a lot of overlap, and there'll be other things that we'll want to rule out. We'll want to make sure that you're not iron deficient from those awful heavy periods that you're having, or you're not vitamin D deficient, or you're not low in zinc, or you're not protein deficient because you're living on coffee because you're trying to lose weight. So I think we have to rule out other things. It could be that your thyroid is overactive or underactive. So we of course want to do blood tests to make sure that they're happening. And I'm going to sound like I'm contradicting myself because I do check hormones and I do check testosterone, but a lot of times in perimenopause they look normal. But I think the thing that would tell me that someone's potentially in perimenopause is, has there been a change in your cycle? And it doesn't have to be dramatic. So it might be that you were a girl who always had a period that literally you could set the clock by and it was always every 29 days and there it was. And suddenly it's now coming at 25 days. Well, that's a change. Or it used to be that you used to have these really light periods and now they're suddenly really heavy, or vice versa. Or you used to have periods that were really cloudy and now they're only very, very light. And so there seems to be a change in the periods, or they used to be really painful, but now they're not, or vice versa. So any change in the period is usually indicative that we are in a perimenopausal phase. It might be early perimenopause. And the thing, unfortunately, at this stage is that I can't tell you if year one of 10 years of a perimenopause or your year one of a perimenopause. It's so different. But I think anyone, to be honest, in their 30s, 40s, it has to be part of the conversation. And we should be excluding people by age. And that's something that really does frustrate me. Like I personally had menopause, a surgical menopause at 34. So I had a very personal experience of this. And it's awful for people to dismiss you and say, oh, too
Yeah.
young for that. And people dismissed me both socially and also medically, professionally. They were like, oh, you're too young. And I can remember even trying to chat to some mums who were a bit older than me. And I was chatting and I said, oh, yeah, and kind of joining in. And I remember being very dismissed and told, well, don't be silly. Like, you're only in your 30s. Like, you're like, basically you're not allowed to be involved in this conversation. So we all need to be very, very careful that actually perimenopause can happen for some women very early, and it can also happen much later than you'd expect. I had a patient yesterday who was 58 and still having her periods, and everyone in her
Wow.
family doesn't, and her mom and her granny and her older sisters all haven't had menopause until they're 60 and 61. So don't ever think, oh, I'm too young or I'm too old. It can be all of those.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I always thought of a certain age brackets. That's, yeah, really interesting. You've mentioned a few times your podcast. Are you able just to share a little bit about the podcast? And obviously we'll link that in our episode description as well.
Yeah, awesome. So my podcast is called All About You with Dr. Shauna Watts. And so you can find it on all the usual Apple, Spotify, etc. And it's also on YouTube. It's just called Dr. Shauna Watts on there. And basically it's a podcast that really is for the women that I want to look after. And I suppose it started off as, I felt very privileged in my career that I've been able to pick up the phone to cardiologists and neurologists, and they've always seemed very happy to chat to me and talk me through things for our mutual patients. And it was born out of the idea of what would it be like for someone to be able to eavesdrop on a conversation that I would have with various specialists. And I've been really lucky to have lots of conversations about perimenopause and menopause with probably the most famous menopause doctors in all the world. And I've also had amazing chats with local doctors as well who really are specialists in their field. So there's everything in there from perimenopause, menopause, hormones, skin, brain health, intimacy, weight, and we've even had lots of talks. There's lots of ADHD and neurodiversity stuff that comes up for a lot of women at this age, because lots of women were never diagnosed when they were younger. We've even had podcasts with divorce lawyers and child psychologists, how to navigate the teenage years. So trying to come at everything that women might be interested in, might be helpful for this age group.
Amazing. Sounds like another great resource. You are such a wealth of knowledge, and what I really appreciate is you take such technical and scientific and medical information and really just communicate it in a way that every Aussie woman and women around the world would be able to understand and relate to an action. So thank you so much for coming on the show. I know you're extremely busy, so thank you to you and your amazing team for making today happen. A huge thank you to you for coming on the podcast today.
Oh, thank you so much. I hope that has helped at least one person. And if anything resonated, people can find me on social media or find my website. There's lots of resources. As you know, I do love an event. So there's often events on the Central Coast in Newcastle that I put on to educate both women and other health professionals. So I'd love it if any of your listeners wanted to come along.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Seed to Success. Make sure you are subscribing so you never miss an episode. If you know a VA or OBM who might benefit from this conversation, feel free to share it with them. Let's chat again soon.